Welcome to Champion Minded, the podcast for those who aim for excellence, not only in the sports arena, but in life. My name is Allistair, author, speaker, mindset and performance coach. And my goal is to help you unleash your unlimited potential and provide you with the tools to achieve greatness. Are you ready to become champion minded? Then let's do this. What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 4 of Champion Minded. I am Allistair McCaw. Welcome to it, or welcome back to the podcast. Good to have you along. I have just actually got in the door from a 4-day trip to Bahamas, which was really relaxing, something I don't do enough of. Got to do a lot of reading, got to do a lot of writing, and sometimes just to do a little bit of thinking as well, which is so important for us. Sometimes, we just need to stop and think about things, think about life, and, maybe new goals, our vision, these type of things, which are important to take care of. Also got to meet some interesting people, one being a former professional surfer, and just fascinating to listen to high performers, how they've achieved what they have, getting into the minds of them, and I definitely hope to have her on the show in the very, very near future. But I'm super excited to have our very first guest on the show, and I've decided to call this part of the show What It Takes. And it's all about getting into the minds and lives of high performers, be it professional athletes or whatever it may be in their fields, and just finding out what it takes to be the best, what it takes to be a very high performer, what their habits are, what a day looks like in a professional athlete or a high performer, what their younger years were growing up, what type of hours they had to put in, the coaches they had, all these interesting things, which I'm sure you're going to find really interesting. And it's all about champion minded. It's all about the motivation they had, the preparation they put in, and of course the mindsets. Today's guest I'm super excited about. It's someone I know very well. It's someone I've worked with for the past 4 years. It's Kevin Anderson. For those of you who don't know Kevin is a professional tennis player on the ATP Tour. He's 31, and he's reached the top 10 in the world, which was back in 2015, if I'm not mistaken. And as we speak, he's virtually on the door of breaking back into the top 10. Last year, 2017, he reached the US Open finals where he lost to Rafael Nadal. So that's Kevin. We're going to be chatting to him. We're going to be touching on some subjects such as his preparation, what a normal day looks like for him. I asked him if he got nervous, and he also gives us some advice for younger athletes out there. What he feels younger athletes need, or should I say what it takes to reach the top. So a super, super interesting interview. Also one that I got to learn more about Kevin. Even knowing him for 4 years, I learned some things as well in this podcast. So for me, it was super interesting. Also, at the end of the podcast, you can stand a chance to win a signed copy of Champion Minded from Kevin. Find out how to do that. That'll be after I've spoken to Kevin today. And I'm sure you're going to really enjoy this interview. I really did. It's a great way to kick off our very first What It Takes on Champion Minded. And I hope you enjoy this one. Kevin, welcome to Champion Minded. Great to have you here, and thanks so much for taking the time from your busy schedule to share with us today.
Sure.
I'm super excited to have you as my very first guest on the Champion Minded podcast in this series of what we call What It Takes. For those who don't know, this part, What It Takes, is when I'll interview people who have reached an incredibly high level in their field or profession with the goal to dissect what it really takes to get to the top and become champion-minded. Kevin, welcome.
Thanks, Al. Thanks for having me on here.
Okay. So first question, Kevin, if you wouldn't mind quickly giving us a brief background of where you grew up, when you first started playing, and how you'd describe your childhood growing up.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I started playing tennis at a very young age. I think I was around maybe 4 or 5 when I first picked up a tennis racket. My dad actually introduced me to the game, and my brother as well. I have a younger brother, 18 months younger than myself, and I think he always had pretty high hopes and aspirations for us. In terms of becoming tennis players, both my parents played tennis. my dad played tennis at a reasonably high level growing up. So he had played his whole life. And I remember one of the first things he had us doing is actually playing swing ball. Obviously tennis is a huge hand-eye sport. We used to spend hours playing swing ball. And I think that was a sort of first progression before I actually got out into the tennis court. But even from the age 6 or 7, I must have really enjoyed playing the sport because, I just spent many, many hours, and we were, fortunate enough to have a tennis court actually on our property, which made practicing very easy. But when I think back of it, tennis really comes to the forefront. I think a lot of our decisions we made as a family and, all our memories are all evolved around tennis. Both my brother and I sacrificed a lot to become the best tennis players we could become. And my parents sacrificed, an incredible amount of time to help us get there. My childhood is, obviously, went to school, had a sort of that side of things was, pretty normal for kids growing up. But I think the amount of time we spent dedicated to the sport, I think, was a little bit different. And that required, I think, a lot of, encouragement and effort from my parents. But I think, from my side, I think I was very self-motivated as well. So I think it was a good balance between me being motivated to be out there and also having a lot of, guidance and encouragement from, especially my dad, who, definitely pushed us a lot. He really saw the value in hard work. And I think coming from South Africa, just being very far from the scene also, forced us to, sometimes work even harder, I think.
And, we're going to speak about that later in the podcast, but that balance between being pushed from your parents, but you also said that you were very self-driven, which would you say that's a very important trait of someone that wants to be successful and something that, there has to be a balance between being pushed and pulled?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think defining what that balance is or coming up with a set equation is almost impossible. Yeah. Obviously, just as I've gone through my tennis career and come across many other families, many other kids, many other stories that I've that I've heard, there's a lot of instances that come to mind where kids have worked very hard and just lost interest, and I think the parents maybe wanted it more than their kids, and the kids sometimes get burnt out, and you're training too hard. And then on the other side of the equation, you maybe have sometimes kids who I feel like want to do it, but tennis is pretty tough. I think some of the challenges that tennis players face, especially at a young age, I think you do need a lot of guidance and you do need a lot of input. So I think looking back at it, I was very fortunate that I had that in my dad and also had that in myself. That not one time can I remember thinking back and saying, I wish. I don't want to be out here on the tennis court. I hate tennis, which I often hear a lot of kids saying that, and that's not going to bode well. I'm sure there'll be times where you might feel like that here and there, but I can honestly say, if I think back, I can almost never recall me feeling I didn't want to be out here. So I think it was a very unique and special relationship that we had.
Yeah, that's something I consult with parents as well, and listening to the words of what kids can say is there's a difference between I want to go to practice and I'm looking forward to going to practice, or I need to practice, whatever it may be, the words I use. But it's so important because by the sounds of it, it sounded like you had an intrinsic motivation from yourself that you love being out there, but there was also that extrinsic motivation coming from parents and obviously accolades and so on. But in my experience of working with players, the ones that have really made it the furthest have had a deep intrinsic motivation. It's come from them.
I mean, it has. As I was saying, in my case, remember as a very young kid, dreaming of being the best in the world. I think where it does become a little bit difficult as a 10 or 11-year-old, seeing my friends having, birthdays or, staying maybe just late to watch a movie and those sort of things, as you're going through it, it's very tough as a kid. I think that's where you sometimes need that help, and that's where I think, my dad played an amazing role, and not only coaching me, but sort of, it was definitely very, tough on us. And I think a lot that he learned from his own experiences growing up. He had very high aspirations of, he was a very good runner, played tennis as well. And I just think, he sort of identified the importance of hard work. And, that's where it is difficult. I'm not saying it was easy by any stretch when I say, I hated playing tennis. There was, many days where, it's a hot day, I'm maybe tired, the last thing I maybe felt like doing was going to go and play tennis, or sometimes tough. I'd rather have gone to movies with my friends instead of going to bed because I had to wake up, early the next morning. But even though I had to make those decisions, I never felt like, once I was out there, I never regretted it or felt like, I wish I was somewhere else. For some reason, even though it was very tough at times, there was definitely a sense of joy and sort of intrinsic motivation that I felt there, because, that feeling of burning out never crossed my mind, or I never really experienced that. So, in that instance, as you were saying earlier, there must have been, thinking back at it, there must have been a very deep desire within me to to work as hard as I did.
Interesting. So before we get onto the professional side of things and life on the tour, you went to college first, correct? You went to Illinois.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about your experience there and how that shifted your career.
Yeah, it was it's quite interesting. I mean, didn't really have any ideas I was actually going to go to college, and it was only my second year under 18s that colleges, coaches actually reached out to me and sort of started offering scholarships and painting the picture of what the college system might look like. And I remember sitting down with my family and sort of examining the options, and the more we looked at it, the more it made a lot of sense. It was an opportunity to base myself in a part of the world that was much closer to the tennis scene. I think one of the big challenges coming from South Africa is just it's so far, and we saw how difficult it would be to base out of South Africa. It would be very expensive, the amount of travel. There weren't that many players in South Africa in terms of training partners. So going to the US, first and foremost, the idea was that it would help me establish a base within the States where, obviously there's a lot of futures, challenges, much easier to travel, around more people playing tennis. And at the same time, I think because I was sort of a little isolated in my junior years and not having that same amount of exposure to the international tennis, I think I needed to mature a little bit as well. And I think going to college allowed me to do that. Fortunately went to a college where the program was very, a lot of purpose was put to, helping those who wanted to turn professional.
You had a great coach there as well, and Brad.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, so good people.
And, I think Brad saw the desire that I had to turn professional. And I think one of the things, he really helped me with was, very, very rarely was any decision made that didn't put my goals of becoming a professional tennis player first. I mean, I remember in, the fall, as an example, one of the, big national tournaments, the, national indoors, there was a futures at the same time. And, I remember having a discussion with Brad and saying, I think it would be better for me to go play the futures and as opposed to the college tennis where I knew these sort of players. And, he agreed with me. And just that's an example of, a lot of coaches would have preferred to have that sort of recognition that their players are doing well at the sort of collegiate tournaments. But as you were saying, it was, a lot of great people there. But just in the decision to go there, and that's what I've said to so many kids. I think college is a great option, and that's something we can have a whole new podcast chat about the benefits of going to college, because I think there's a lot. I was able to play a ton of matches, very high level. In the summers, I was able to go and play professional tournaments, get acquainted with other professionals, and like sort of bridge that gap a little bit.
You said it at the start, and I love that, is that maturity. Because, what do you really know at 17, 18? And I think you took a very mature choice there, figured it out, physically got stronger, played more tennis. Like you said, you created the right environment for yourself. I mean, environment is so important, isn't it? Putting yourself in the right place, like you said, coming from South Africa. And for the listeners out there, Kevin and I are actually from the same city, Johannesburg. So we were very isolated. So it was so important to make that move. So excellent. So Kevin, you reached the top 10 in 2015, an amazing achievement. You had a difficult year in 2016 with injuries and disruption, almost dropped out of the top 100. But in 2017, you shot right back up, of course, with that amazing US final against Rafael Nadal. Now again, we're in February 2018, you're knocking on the top 10 again. Tell us how you were able to deal with, more specifically, the lows, especially that year of 2016.
Well, I think... I tell a lot of people, tennis players, but even when I'm back, when I go back to South Africa and talk to kids, I feel like one of the messages I try to talk about a lot is, there's a lot of highs and there's a lot of lows, and I've had that since I started playing tennis, since I was 10 years old. Of course, looking back at it, the fact that in my second year 16s in our national championships, I had 8 match points all on my own serve and ended up losing the match. Now it looks like it's very insignificant, but at the time it felt very significant. It was, it felt like the worst thing that could have ever happened to me. Exactly. And I think ever since I was a kid, I've done a very good job of recognizing that and using the lows to try and motivate me as much as possible. And sometimes it's very difficult, it's very tough, but I've never got despondent from that. I was disappointed, and I think it's okay to be disappointed. I think it's okay to, just to feel upset that things maybe, didn't go your way, as long as you use it in the right way. And I feel like I've always done a pretty good job with that. And I think, learning that lesson, which I think, my parents really, made me very aware of from a young age, sort of helped me as I've gotten older, and where it does matter a lot more. And as you mentioned, 2016, was a tough year, especially coming off the back of 2015, where, I reached top 10, a lifelong goal. I think terrific accomplishment for any tennis player.
For sure.
And, finishing the year ranked 12 and, feeling like very close to knocking on the door and cementing myself, in the top 10. And, from the very first week in 2016, I remember I was playing a exhibition event in Abu Dhabi, and I remember getting onto the practice court for my first hit, doing one of my warm-up exercises, and just feeling the knee everywhere. And that sort of lasted on and off, not just the knee, but various parts of my body throughout the year. And sort of each time, always motivated to try and come back. And I think looking back at it, I learned some very valuable lessons. So the positive I took from that was in 2017 when, starting the year off, I'd finished 2016 with a hip injury, and I decided to not go down to Australia and take a little bit more time off, get more prepared, get my body, healthier, which was a very tough decision. But I think that decision was made because of the experiences and what I'd learned throughout 2016. And, I think that set me up very well. It was tough coming back, and I had some challenges coming back on tour after I'd been away for a few months, but staying healthy is obviously a huge priority, I should say. So regardless of what the highs and the lows are, I feel like as long as you can keep learning, from them. I remember
looking for the positives.
Exactly. Yeah. I think Andy Roddick once said, not to me, maybe it's a bit of through the grapevine a little bit, but I remember him saying a little bit that the highs are never as high as you think they're going to be, and the lows are never as low either. And that's it's not that you're not going to celebrate the highs. Of course you are, and you're not going to be disappointed about the lows, but I think to keep it in perspective, I think is always very important.
Excellent. You've recently changed coaches after a successful run with our fellow South African friend and coach Neville Godden, now working with Brad Stein, who's worked with Jim Courier and amongst others. But let me ask you what you specifically look for in a coach. What, it's different things for different people, what they look for in a coach. As we know, it's so difficult to make that match because they almost become family, especially with being on the tour. You're spending a lot of time together.
Yep.
What do you look for in a coach?
Yeah, I think that's changed definitely as time has gone on. For me specifically, as you're saying, Neville and I had a great relationship. We spent 4 years together. Learned a lot from him, and we spent a lot of time with each other as well. We got on great, and we still get on great. And I think that's definitely one of the first things. I feel like you have to have a good relationship. We spend so much time on the road together, but I think one of the things I've always said with tennis, it's very interesting, is that I'm employing a staff around me, coaches, physios, trainers, and so essentially because I'm paying the bills, I kind of, you feel like you're the boss in some instances, but at the same time, you need those same people to also take charge. And
it's a very unique,
exactly,
a very unique situation.
You're sort of looking for them to take charge, and it's a very small sort of line that you have to find where it's the right balance. I think you look at some maybe more of the team sports where the players aren't paying the coaches maybe have a bit more of a final say. It's sort of their way. With it's tennis players, it's, from a coach's perspective, you're like, well, I want him to do this, but I don't want to overstep my boundary because also he's paying my salary. And so as you said, it's very tricky, but I feel like for the most part, for me, the biggest things I look at is you look at experience, where who they coached, or sort of from their playing days, what what have they accomplished. But a lot of that is just on paper. I feel like the biggest steps is actually getting onto the court and spending time together. And language is such an important thing. You can hear the same message from two different people and interpret it completely different. And so I think that's always important. You have to connect. You have to sit down and come up with goals together. I feel like you have to get pushed the right way. I feel like my coaches also have to let me sort of take some charge in some aspects as well. And it's a tough dynamic. But I feel like over my career, I feel like I've found some good coaches. I've been somebody who has had extended relationships with coaches. A lot of players sometimes go through coaches very quickly. I feel like that hasn't been the case with me. And I've just started working with Brad, and obviously it's very early on to our relationship, but I think there's a lot of positive signs, and I think I'm really looking forward to spending more time with him.
Well, I mean, I think I'm almost going into the fourth year of working with you, and you're a player that definitely values feedback, but you're also a player that gives a lot of feedback, which helps the team as well. And that's for me has been a great joy to work with a guy like yourself who can give feedback, take feedback, and success in a team environment involves those hard conversations, right? Sometimes.
It does, and I'm sure you would be the first to say that. I feel like sometimes because I think I take such an interest and want to be very involved in my sort of day-to-day decision making, sort of what I'm doing. It's I feel like that's where the relationship is important, and there's been times I'm sure where you have felt where that balance of okay, Kev, I've understood what you're saying, but this is sort of what I suggest, and I feel like for me it's also been a challenge of sometimes taking in advice, and I feel like I've definitely gotten much better as my career's gone on, and at the same time as I get older I get more experience, and I feel like I have maybe more valuable input as well. And so I feel like, as you said, I think communication is always such a key component in any working relationship. And I think if you take our relationship from 4 years ago, the amount that I've learned in terms of the specific movement patterns and everything, both on and off the court, that I can use sort of day to day, and is obviously very valuable. And that's something just because I take an interest in it, I feel like maybe I sort of ask too many questions, but I think that's also part of my my personality, and what helped me to get here in the first place.
Well, here's the thing, and that's very interesting. It's good for especially younger athletes to understand, is that you're deeply interested, you're deeply invested, you're a scholar of the sport. We know Andy Murray is a scholar of the sport as well, watches a lot of video, watches a lot of things, but that is also what's made you the top 10 player you are, is that you've been invested in every conversation, every opinion of your team, and you question it, and you don't question it in a way of arrogance or just trying to be difficult. You question it from a side of being interested and wanting to know why.
Yep. And I think again, especially to sort of the young listeners, hopefully who are listening in, there is also a fine balance between trusting your team and you can't question everything. So you do need to listen. You do need to take in advice. You do need to, even if it's sometimes not something that you maybe grasp straight away. It's something that I think it's very important to surround yourself with the best possible people, but in doing so, you have to trust that process. And of course, after time, you can make sort of conclusions, and you can sort of analyze what has worked and what hasn't worked. And I feel like that's where, at least I try, for the most part, sort of ask questions and bring my own input. Try and find that balance between trusting everybody who's around me, sort of seeing the results, and trying to provide feedback that helps my whole coaching staff. And I'm sure there's times where I think maybe I'm asking too many questions, and that's something I'm working towards myself. But I definitely think that ideal working relationship is trusting those around you, and at the same time challenging them, and also asking maybe why have you thought of it this way? Hey, maybe I was looking at video and and I saw this other player doing this. What do you think? I think those are the kind of conversations that I think sometimes are very important.
Excellent. Kevin, you're an incredibly structured and routine kind of guy, a trait of a champion-minded individual. Run through us what a typical day would look like for you in training when you're at home. Yeah,
I mean, that's obviously a very important clarification you put, because my days change a lot when I'm at home or when I'm on the road competing. Typically at home, in a sort of training period, I would go to the courts in the morning. I usually get my tennis session in the morning. I'm based here in Florida. Right now we're in a sort of winter month, so the temperature's not that hot, but especially in the summer, it gets very hot here. So, your only hope is really to try and practice a bit earlier in the morning. I don't go super early. Since being on the tour, no matches are starting at junior days at 8 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. So usually I'm on the court training between 9 and 9:30 or 10 around to noon, which is still on the earlier side of things, but it's a little bit more realistic, when I'm playing early matches on tour. Excuse me. Getting out to the courts first, I do a very good warm-up routine. Probably takes me a good 30, 45 minutes doing some...
Something important, again, for the younger athletes to understand is just your attention to detail of preparation, which is a controllable, but also your warm-up is extended.
Exactly.
It's what I like about you is that you don't apologize for having an extended warm-up, because you take your job professionally, because you'll find a lot of players sometimes rush through it because they're worried about the other player waiting, whatever it may be, but you take that side very seriously, which I find a lot of junior athletes don't.
Yeah, of course. Definitely try to get to practice a little bit earlier, as my warm-up seems to have gotten a little bit longer in sort of the last few years. But just without getting to the specific details, which I'll go through now, the overriding concept always is, my health and my body comes first, because I spend so much time on the practice court that the amount of actual value that I'm going to be getting, from a 2-hour practice session, while it's a lot, nothing will be as beneficial if I can't stay healthy. So my body always comes first. So a typical, training day will be, I get to the courts, I'll do my full warm-up, which lasts about 30 or 40 minutes. I usually have around a 2-hour training session. And even just a couple of years ago, I was going a little bit longer. And I remember us having a conversation, and, my physio as well, and we sort of came up with 2 hours. So I feel like I've done a pretty good job with that as well. It's very rarely will I train hitting tennis balls, not including my warm-up, for more than 2 hours. Again, I think it's just looking after my body, and then, a good cool down, a good post-practice stretch. Come home, I'll have some lunch, and then, in the afternoons, I always do some sort of physical session, whether it's in the gym, a cardio session, or we're in the gym doing some tennis-specific movements. But I'm only doing one tennis session now. When I was younger, I was always doing two sessions. But I think as I've gotten older, turning 32 this year, which is, fortunately much younger than people thought a few years ago from a tennis standpoint, but, it's still... a lot of it is about recovery and, looking after myself. And that applies to everything I do. And probably one of the most important parts of my day is at the end, once I've done with my tennis and my training sessions, every day I'm having some sort of rehab session. So, I have a full-time physiotherapist who travels with me. I have somebody who works with me also here when I'm home. And we're doing between an hour and an half almost every single day with hands-on therapies, or just to try to keep my body as healthy as possible.
So, would you say you're doing around about 4.5-5 hours of committed training? If we were to involve obviously the recovery, the rehabilitation, and all that type of work, around about 5 hours a day.
Yeah, I would say it's probably between 5 and 6 hours. I'd say, and
that's minus travel time and all
yeah,
that. So
exactly.
It really is a full time.
It is, and of that spent. If somebody just had to watch me playing, the stuff that I would showcase in terms of if we're making like a sort of documentary or something that might excite viewers, of that 6 hours, maybe only 2 to 3 hours would be actually, the interesting stuff. Yeah. It's the boring stuff that nobody wants to see.
There you go.
That's also, very, very, very important. Watching me do back rotations, or, having foam rolling, or getting a nap in, or what I'm paying attention to my nutrition, or getting to bed early, stuff that people don't really think about. When you add all that together, that's vitally important. In
Champion Minded, we talk about the abilities you have. The skill is one thing, but the abilities of mental toughness comes down to doing the other things that people don't enjoy, like you just said there now, the rehabilitation, the naps, the nutrition, all these type of things, and of course the repetition to master any skill, which a lot of people cash out at rep 9, but you're still going at rep 99 or 999. You're able to focus in on that, and that's one of the, I've found working with you, one of your greatest qualities is that you're really committed to repetition. You're committed to the boring, which is a big part of mastery.
I think so. And I mean, I also think just, with tennis, especially when we're on the road and playing tournaments, there's so much out of your control. You're waiting around for matches. You don't know exactly when your start time's going to be. You don't know when you're going to be playing until sometimes at 9, 10 p.m. the night before the the schedule comes out for the next day. You don't know who your opponent's going to be. You don't know how long your matches are going to go. So when I'm home, I feel like just having that routine, I feel like I really hone in on that. I find a sense of comfort within that as well. And also, as you've always said, take care of what you can take care of, because there's so much you can't take care of, especially when you get on the road. I mean, when I'm on the road, I still have a whole lot of routines and, set structures. You have to be more flexible. But there's just so much that you can't control. So I feel like one of the first aspects, in Champion Minded is definitely taking care of, controlling what you can control.
Yeah, I love that. You have great support with your wife Kelsey, who travels with you as well, but there's been a new addition in the last year or so, Lady Katie.
Yep. So we adopted a dog here in Florida from one of the local animal rescues, who we've actually done a few charity events with them, Desi's Second Chance Rescue, and it's something we've both been very passionate about. We always spoke about getting a dog without thinking we're actually going to do it. Just obviously the life of a tennis player, traveling around doesn't make it too easy, but we always say we got pretty lucky with our dog's personality. She travels with us. She comes to my matches. She
gets a credential.
Yeah, she doesn't. She doesn't make a sound anywhere. She's watched me on some of the biggest stages, like finals of US Open, and some of the smaller first round matches at some of the smaller tournaments.
Well, she does have a lot to say to the team sometimes.
She does. She's very protective of Kelsey and myself. She takes a long time to warm to strangers, but it's been. I think what's also nice, just obviously having Kelsey with me traveling on the road. That's been a huge support for me. We did a long period of time when she was working in Chicago, and we did the long distance relationship. And from a personal from a personal viewpoint, it's been very nice having her travel with me. But even from a tennis standpoint, she knows me better than everybody. She's become very astute with her tennis knowledge, and she knows where she can help me. And when I am spending so many weeks on the road, just having her company and her support has been a huge benefit. And even something like having our dog travel with us when after a tough match, whether I've won or lost,
they don't care, do they?
Exactly, but I think it sort of establishes a sort of sense of balance, which I think as I've gotten on my career, I think it's been a very welcomed addition.
Excellent. Kevin, if you could give some bits of advice to a younger athlete, it doesn't matter what sport they play, what would it be, especially if they want to play at college or a high level?
I sort of get asked that question, quite a bit, and when I've given some, talks, especially to kids, that's always something, I'm thinking to myself, what's the most important bits of information? I feel like there's obviously a whole lot. I mean, I've, spent tens of thousands of hours myself getting to where I have. I've worked with so many different people. It's have a sort of vast wealth of information that I'd love to sort of wrap up in 2 or 3 words. So which is tough, but I think there are a few things that come up more than the rest of them. I mean, the first one is just hard work. I mean, it sounds so boring. It's so sort of cliched at this point in time, but I mean, it's impossible to get anywhere without it, regardless of what your field is, whether you're into academics, whether you're into music, whether you're into sports. It makes no difference. I mean, you have to put in the hours. You have to put in, the hard work.
You have to pay your due.
Exactly. And, there's always discussions about talent versus hard work. And regardless of what your talent levels are, you have to spend the time. Nobody gets there by accident. If you want to be the best in the world at something, you just have to work hard. And, especially at a young age, it's very important to instill those
values.
Those values, and I also think, as I've sort of experienced myself, you have to work smart as well. You have to be doing the right things over and over. There's no point spending 10 hours a day if you can't practice it. You can't practice the next day because you're completely overblown. So there's always a balance, and I think finding that balance is a challenge where you have to take in advice, you have to know yourself, I don't think there's a specific right answer to that, but
surround yourself with good people.
Exactly, and that's definitely, and taking that advice, try find the most experienced person you can to get advice, because if I spoke to somebody specific, I could probably give them set routines and stuff that I've been doing. But in terms of a general statement, you have to work hard, you have to work smart as well, and I mean, more than anything, I mean, you have to believe in yourself. You have to,
there you go.
You have to go to bed at night thinking, that I've got this, regardless of where you are in the world. I struggled a little bit coming from South Africa, where I was so far from the tennis scene. I didn't know what was out there. I think I found it very intimidating. And when I first
measure where you were,
exactly.
In a way,
I mean,
the best.
I feel like I couldn't, and I think sometimes the plus side of that is it made me work even harder, because I didn't know. I was like, I don't know what these guys are doing. The only thing I could rely on is making sure that I could I was going to work harder than anybody.
I like that, because so often people compare themselves to other ones, but you were comparing yourself to the person you were the day before.
Exactly.
How can I get better than I was yesterday?
Yeah. I think one of the challenges I faced, because I was so far from the scene, in terms of, I always knew that I had a lot of belief in myself. I would say I struggled with a little bit of my self-belief in terms of, where, how good of a player I was. I don't think I gave myself enough credit, and that's something I'm still working on today. We were out at practice this morning,
even after reaching the top.
Exactly. I mean, one of your comments to me this morning at practice was, I was hitting good shots, and you're like, let's hear it when that you need to celebrate. You need to recognize all the good shots you're hitting. You can't be critical the whole time, and that's a huge adjustment and change that I've really tried to make in the last few years.
Which we saw at the U.S. Open,
exactly,
the final against Rafael Nadal.
But that you have to have that belief. You have to be your own best coach. If you take that voice that you hear in your mind that's with you all the time, and you put into a third person, if you're out on the court and you missed the ball, and your coach said, "What's wrong with you? You're terrible," that it's pathetic. You would sort of roll your eyes, and you would find another coach very quickly. But because it's in your own mind, you seem to have, you seem that like you just accept it. You miss a shot, or you fail an exam, or whatever it might be, and your own commentary in your head of, you suck, you can't do this, you're terrible. It's almost like you feel, you're more accepting of that voice, because it's it's in your own mind, and you have to get rid of that. And it's something I'm still doing to this day. I mean, 26 years later, into the sport, I'm still challenging myself to do better at that, of being my own best coach. So, and
improving self-talk.
Exactly. So just off the top of my head, I mean, well, it's not just the top of my head. I've given it a lot of thought, but I feel pretty confident in saying, three big things is, obviously work hard, work smart, and believe in yourself. I mean, you have to try to be your own best coach.
Man, you're dropping some gold today. I love it. I love it. Really, thank you. Final few questions. How important are parents out there in a sports kids development? And if you could just give one or two bits of advice to parents out there.
Yeah, of course. I mean, obviously we spoke a little bit about it earlier. My parents played a huge part in my tennis career. My dad coached me for 17, 18 years. One-on-one, and obviously when I went to college and turned pro, was still involved. Didn't have that as much of a primary role. My mom played a huge supporting role in everything that goes on, from practices, gym sessions, and also providing a lot of motherly love in that whole process. I'm not a parent myself, so obviously I can't comment. I've been.
Oh, you have Lady Katie.
Yeah, exactly. So that's true. Practice. But she's perfect as she is, so she doesn't have any aspirations of being the world's best tennis player just yet. I think you have to be firm. You have to push your kids. There's so many distractions, especially at a very young age, and I think it's all about balance. There'll be times where I think you have to teach a value of sacrifice and hard work, and I think that is tough. I mean, any 10-year-old, I think, would rather be with friends at a party than out by themselves practicing on a hot court, or studying for an exam, or practicing on the piano, or whatever it might be. So I think you have to find that balance between pushing a child, and obviously you don't want them to be burnt out or dislike what they're doing. You have to find what what the kid loves to do, and you have to I think be there, whether it's a girl or a boy, in whatever sort of aspect they're doing. Fortunately for me, it was a sport that I truly loved. My dad had huge aspirations for me, and really pushed me very hard, and I received it very very well. If it was a sport that I didn't, I hope my dad would have seen that and pushed me in another direction. Fortunately for us, it was a very good match, and a sport that we both loved, and one that I've will love for the rest of my life.
He instilled a very, very high work ethic.
Yeah, he did.
In you, because I've worked with a lot of top players, but you're probably one of the very, very... Of course, to get to the top, everybody has a work ethic, but your work ethic is exceptionally high. So,
so back to your question, I think parents play a very important role. There's no question. Sometimes parents play too much of a role, and sometimes get in the way, and not sort of allow other coaches to come in, are not sort of open to hearing other ideas, feel like it's sort of this way or no way, and sort of hamper the kid's development. And there's sometimes time where you have to step back. I'm sure for me, my dad looking and understanding that going to college was a huge sacrifice. He's so involved for so long, and now sort of taking a step back and letting me go to college and stuff was a very tough decision. But I think obviously, looking back at it was a very important decision.
One of the questions I put out there to listeners was, that they asked from me, what they'd like me to ask you. What does the final hour before a match look like for you at a tournament? Do you have a routine? Do you have a...
Of course. So one of the challenges with tennis is you're never actually sure when you're going to go on. Sometimes the nicest time of the day to play is when you have a not before time, or you have when you're first on, so you know exactly when you're stepping out on the court. An ideal hour before I'm stepping out into the match court is that I've already done all my warm-ups, I should say.
On the court.
Exactly. I can say right off the bat, one of the first things I learned when I moved from college and getting more professional and getting to the top ranks in the world is you have to warm up earlier to allow yourself more time to sort of prepare for matches. So I've warmed up at least an hour and a half before I've gotten on the court. So the last hour was spent just getting all my equipment ready, taking a shower, changing, getting my match gear on, making sure my equipment's already, my racks have already been strung, so my grips are getting put on. I'm doing maybe a few last minute physical checkups, and then about 30 minutes before, I start doing some mental preparation. Visualization's obviously very important. And then the last 20 minutes is, you need to get your body activated. With tennis, you want to be ready to go from the very first point, not just from a health standpoint, but from a success standpoint. The last thing you want is to get off to a slow start. So again, what you can control is having a good warm up. So by the time I get there, I feel like I'm sweating, and I'm pretty ready to go. Obviously, the challenges when you're not sure when you're going on, you have to be quite flexible. You're sort of in a holding pattern. You get everything ready, all your equipment's ready to go, and when you sort of think that maybe 30 minutes before going on, that's when you start your physical warm up. And sometimes you've done the physical warm up and you have to wait more. There's been matches where I've warmed up maybe 4 or 5 times before going out there, but that's something that after doing it a few times, you just get more used to it.
Yeah, it's all part of the job, isn't it?
Exactly.
Do you get nervous?
Of course I get nervous. I get nervous to this day, regardless of whether when I was walking out for the finals of US Open or the first round of my next tournament. I remember reading somewhere somebody saying that, you should really be nervous if you're not going to get nervous, for a match. And I think getting nervous, from an emotional standpoint, gets you ready for the match. It shows that you care about it. Obviously, you have to learn how to manage it. You don't want to be too nervous where you can't function. But I think just accepting that you're nervous and embracing it, I think, will go a huge step in sort of helping those nerves. And
because this is so important for young
I
athletes to hear right now.
Obviously, Billie Jean King's pretty famous for a lot of things, but one of her great sayings is pressure is a privilege. Walking out into center court at Wimbledon, of course you're going to be nervous, but think how hard you worked to get there, and you're only nervous because it's such a big opportunity. And obviously you have to learn to deal with that, and you don't want it to cripple your performance. But I think just embracing it and saying, I am nervous, but that's a cool thing. I've worked very hard to get to this point. I think helps you deal with those nerves. I think it's an interesting balance. It's I do still get nervous for matches. I think I handle them much better. And if anything, I think it actually helps me play better tennis.
Oh, there you go. That's so important for the young athletes to hear. Superstitions?
Yeah, I think when I was a kid, I had a few more. I remember having specific shirts for whoever I was playing. I used to step on the lines, and I feel like I've lost a few of them. I'm sure there's some habits that I have that have stayed with me. I remember reading in a book, if they were talking about putting on socks. If your left sock, you need to put it on before the right sock. Do I think it's going to necessarily change the outcome of the match? No. However, if that puts you in the right frame of mind, you should definitely do it. I'm trying to think. My habits of where I place my water bottles, or when I'm out on the court, sort of I would take my racket out first before putting my water bottles away. It's all silly little things. However, for me, I'm used to it. I think superstition sometimes forms part of your routine, something that you can rely on. Rituals, exactly. That's exactly the word I was looking for, and that's what you can sort of get a lot of comfort from, and it helps put you in the right mindset. So, if you need to put on your left sock before your right sock every time, and it helps you get into a good mindset, I think that's the mind's so important. So that's going to help. I think you should do it.
One of our funniest moments came from the Australian Open, where you played your good friend Rafael Nadal, and I think it was the third round. And it was off a return where we all know that Rafa is very superstitious with rituals with his water bottles. And off a return, you hit both water bottles, went flying.
Yeah.
And the crowd laughed, and that was like one of those moments of...
It was. And actually, I haven't really told this to too many people, but I also have a superstition with my water bottles. I haven't had the same career as Rafa, so it doesn't get put in the limelight as much. But I think since I was 10 or 11 years old, I actually have my own sort of water bottle ritual. My mom actually asked me. I didn't even know that. I know. I remember my mom asking me, she's like, Kev, is that really necessary? You're spending so many times on the water bottles, but it stayed with me. But I feel like at this point it seems like I might be copying Rafa. But the next time I see him, I'm gonna have to ask him when he started doing it, because mine goes back till I was 10 or 11. But mine sort of slides under the limelight a little bit.
Yeah, he's probably going to ask you about that moment you try to knock the water bottles down. So anyway, Kevin, awesome. Rapid fire questions.
Alrighty.
No more than one word or a sentence.
Okay.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Favorite hobby?
Playing my guitar.
Favorite band musician?
Mark Knopfler with Dire Straits.
I love them. Dog or cat?
I'm more of a dog person.
That's an obvious one. Last book read?
The last book read was Waking Up by Sam Harris.
Okay, and he has a podcast as well, I believe?
He does, yep.
Okay, I got to check that out. Favorite book ever read?
Lord of the Rings.
Okay. Seen the movie?
If you're going to ask me what my favorite movie is, it's also Lord of the Rings.
That's the next one. Favorite movie?
Lord of the Rings.
Okay, so big Lord of the Rings guy.
Yep.
Favorite food?
I have to go with sushi.
Okay. Favorite sports team?
Favorite sports team are the Proteas, the South African cricket team, and the Springboks. I'm a big cricket and rugby fan.
There you go, South African, born and bred. Favorite country or place ever visited?
I think our favorite one is New Zealand.
Okay, big rugby focus.
Also a big rugby fan, but a huge rivals. But I've some very close friends in New Zealand. My wife and I have spent a lot of time there. It's a beautiful country, and we've really enjoyed each and every time we've been.
Tea, coffee, or protein shake?
Definitely, I'm a bit of a smoothie connoisseur. I enjoy making my smoothies. I have a Vitamix. I sometimes make some interesting concoctions, but I know this is more than the one word or sentence, but I feel like I'm pretty proud with some of the recipes I have.
Person who inspired or inspires you the most?
I think I'd have to say my family, my wife, my brother, and my parents.
If you weren't a professional tennis player, what would you be?
I would hope to think I'd be a professional musician, a touring guitarist for some of the best bands in the world.
Okay, I like that. One word that describes you best?
I would have to say hardworking.
That's two.
But there's a hyphen, so we'll count it as one.
Your best sporting moment?
My best sporting moment, I'd have to say making the finals of US Open. I'd say just the joy of, after I won that semi-final match.
Biggest pet peeve?
Biggest pet peeve are wonky tables. When you're going to go and eat and the table doesn't sit. My wife always makes fun of me, but it drives me crazy. I have a mad dash to try to put a napkin under to just balance out the table.
I had one of those this morning at breakfast. Funny enough. Favorite cheat food?
Ooh, I have to say a hamburger. I actually enjoy my hamburgers.
Okay. All right. Well, before we get on to our final question, Kevin, I'd like to acknowledge you. I'd like to, first of all, acknowledge you as a friend. I'd like to acknowledge you for your dedication, your discipline, your commitment to your career. Also, that you give back, supporting, obviously, the charities and the dog adoption charities. But a great husband, a great friend. So I'd like to acknowledge you on that.
Thanks, Al.
But final question, what does it take to be champion-minded?
I think we've been through a lot, over the last sort of 30 minutes or so, and, to be champion-minded, obviously, as you wrote a book about that, a couple 100 pages. I think there's a lot of lessons. I think, if I had to narrow it down as much as I could, I think it's, to be champion-minded is to really challenge yourself, day in and day out. I think it's, as they say, a lot of the cliched sayings, are really valuable. Sort of, make each day, challenge yourself to be the best you can each and every single day. I think one of the best quotes I remember reading at a young age was from John Wooden, the, famous basketball coach. And he said, paraphrasing a little bit, that sort of success is a direct result of knowing that you did the best in becoming the best that you are capable of becoming. And that means, obviously, you want to be the best in the world. You go to bed, you dream at, accomplishing, big feats, whether for me in the tennis world, winning Grand Slams. I think for me, the biggest challenge I've had is, putting myself out there, doing everything I can, and just becoming the best that I'm capable of becoming. And I think at the end of the day, more than that, you can't do. There'll be a lot of lessons. There'll be a lot of highs and lows. It's all part of the journey. So if I had to say, I think that quote, really meant a lot to me. Challenge yourself each and every single day. There's, so much to learn. Whatever your field of endeavor is, it's multifaceted. There's stuff you have to do, whether you rely on yourself, family members will have a huge input. Other people of the community, whether you have a coaching team, friends, whoever it might be. I think it all comes down to you sort of pushing yourself each and every single day.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Couldn't finish in a better way. Kevin,
perfect. Thanks so much, Al.
It's been a pleasure.
I'd love to be back on soon.
Thank you. So guys, there you have it, our very first interview on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, on what it takes. Big thanks to Kevin Anderson for taking the time to speak to us. He's got an incredibly busy schedule. In fact, this week he's in New York playing, and then very soon he'll be off to Indian Wells. But super thanks to Kevin. Such a humble guy, hard worker. Speaking in the interview just about his inner burning desire and just all that commitment that it takes to get to the top. What I also found fascinating was him growing up and not knowing where he stood and what his level was, and his commitment just to get better every day, not to chase the competition as such, but to just improve himself day by day. Also interesting to hear about his upbringing. Also interesting to hear about his superstitions and things that I didn't even know of. And I've watched probably close on 100 matches of Kevin, and I've never actually picked up on one or two of those superstitions, and that's always fascinating to know as well. Also, I hope you enjoyed those rapid fire questions. I know Kevin did, and in future we're going to be getting a lot more high performers onto what it takes, and using more or less the same format. Some interesting questions, and of course having that rapid fire at the end, which I think is always fun. But as I said at the beginning of the podcast, you can stand a chance to win a signed copy of Champion Minded from Kevin Anderson, our guest on today's show. And it's pretty simple. All you need to do is subscribe to iTunes and leave a review. And I'm going to be choosing a winner next week, which I'm going to announce on episode 5 of Champion Minded. And I'll send that book out to that one lucky winner who is going to leave a review on iTunes and subscribe. Also, if you enjoyed the show, please tell as many people as possible, friends, foes, enemies, family, team members, coaches, whoever, anyone who wants to excel in sports and in life. Also, head on over to iTunes and subscribe. As I said, you'll stand a chance to win a signed book this week. And if you want to connect on social media, I'm on Twitter at Allistair McCaw, Facebook McCaw Method, Instagram Be Champion Minded, and also over on my website allistairmccaw.com. So friends, that's it again for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back next week again. And until then, stay champion minded, my friends.